So, okay. So I say hello to everybody. I'm happy to see so many people here in our conference room. Maybe still people are coming. I'm Thomas Harms, and I'm the moderator of our second talk here in our series Global Empathy. It is an evening where we want to talk about the work of Eva Reich and what she has done in her life and what was her work about. So it's about the gentle bioenergetics, her pioneering work. That is the theme of this evening. And I want to say two words before I introduce my two speakers. So global empathy has really the idea to bring people together, scientists from different fields, from holistic medicine, from psychotherapy, from social studies. People who are really are interested to change consciousness, to change that what we call global empathy. That means our attitude to human life and to our planet in a way. And I'm absolutely convinced that we need this emotional climate change in our world to change really that. What was let's say the global climate on our world. So it's an interrelation between these two things. And I'm coming from the field of the baby therapy and from the working with parents and children, and many of my colleagues too. And I think there's a big impact on this work for this future of the life on our planet. So that was the reason why I started this series of talks and presentations. And so maybe to put a little piece to bring some new elements together and to work for a new future of children and future of parents and future of human beings. So today I want to talk about peace in utero. Peace begins in utero, and that is a quote from Eva Reich. And Eva Reich was one of my teachers in the 80s, and I think she did very big and pioneering work for the field of baby therapy, for psychosomatics, psychotherapy, also for new medicine in different fields. So I think she did a tremendous important work, and that is something we want to talk this evening about. And I'm very happy that I can welcome here Renata Reich Moise from Maine and Handbook, and on the other side, Judyth Weaver from Seattle. Judyth is psychosomatic psychotherapist, and she's originally coming from the dancing field. Maybe you say later some words for that, to your biography. And Renata is a midwife working in Maine, nearby in Ellsworth, I think was the name of the city. And so they're both very much from different sides, personally and also professionally connected with Eva's work. They can tell us as experts a lot about that, the backgrounds. And so I'm very happy that you're here and that I can share your experiences with us and me. And I'm looking forward to the evening. So the program will be like that we start talking a little bit about Eva's biography. I will do a little introduction, a few minutes, like say 10, 15 minutes. And then we start with the talk. Maybe for people it's a little easier to follow who Eva Reich was in her life and different steps in her career. giving some pictures and photos as an impression, and then we start with the talk between three of us, and then in the end we have some time for questioning. Okay, that's the idea. So I have one eye always on people who are coming into the conference, so I hope that's not too disturbing. Okay, so here we see Eva Reich, and I love this picture, and it's quite late in her life, and directly in front of her house in Handbook in Maine, and she's very lively, and eyes and the curiosity, that was something which was very something very typical I saw with Eva. Eva I met in the mid of the 80s in Berlin. I was a young student, psychology student, 87. It was the first time when I met her there. It was a basis for her worldwide journeys and where she was presenting her work all over the world. And Berlin was again and again a place where she came to. And so that was my first moment when I met her. I was 22 years old, and she, in a way, she set seeds in myself. I mean, her idea of a neurosis prevention, of working with babies and parents and pregnant women, and having this whole attitude in protecting natural life, that was an idea I was really getting from her, and that was also important aspect for me, but that was my background. So Eva was born 1924 in Vienna. She was the daughter of the psychoanalysts Wilhelm Reich and Annie Pink Reich. Both of them were young psychoanalysts, and it was a young generation after the First World War. And we can say they were very political oriented, showed social interest. And in this group of these psychoanalysts in Vienna, they tried to transmit the ideas and the insights of the psychoanalytic work into the social world, let's say, to improve child rearing, relationships. And they were founding counseling centers for sexual education, for example. In 1930, they moved to Berlin. Both of them, they were parts of the sex pole movement, and they were both part of the Socialist Party. And in that time, they were very much convinced that the political way is the way how to bring all these new ideas, these innovative ideas into the world. The parents had then their crisis already, and they separated in 1933. And that time, Eva Reich was moving with her mother, so she lived with her mother and her sister Laura, and they had to move because of the Nazis in Germany to Prague, so they escaped and they lived there for a while. In that time, Eva had not a lot of contact with her father. In 1938, Annie, the mother of Eva, and Laura, her sister, they went to New York, USA, so they had to really leave Europe and their home in order really to have protection and to be safe. And her mother had a psychoanalytic praxis in New York. So, and Eva was living with them. Eva was studying medicine in the States, and in the 40s, beginning 40s. As in the end of the 40s, she finished that. And in that time, Eva Reich went back to see more her father, Wilhelm Reich. There was a hard period in the 40s, it's important to know, where the parents, the ex-partners, had a lot of battles, and there were a lot of fights around the children, and it was not a very nice thing, what happened. It was very terrifying also for Eva. She saw her father in Scandinavia when he was living there with his second wife, Elsa Lindenberg. But it was all very seldom. And in the late 40s, she got more in contact and more and more interested in his scientific work. In 1950, she began to be a scientific assistant of Wilhelm Reich. And in that time, Reich was already very much interested in the natural science and the life energy science. And Eva was part of the bioenergetic cancer research, of the biological work and the biome research. She was also in the later desert greening project involved, where Reich was working in Arizona, so the cloud busting work. So Eva was very familiar with the late Reichian work, the ergonomic work, and also in her later life and her professional life, she always wanted to try to integrate these ideas, let's say the energetic ideas, let's say this new life science. In 1952, Eva Reich was becoming a country doctor in Hancock, so just in a house across the road where Renata is still living. And so she was dealing with all kinds of family issues and medical issues. So she helped with in birthing, she was helping when people were dying. And she was really in the countryside. She did counseling for sexual things. So it was similar things, so prevention, sexual prevention. And she was very active in that days. Reich died in 1957 in the prison in Washington, and Eva worked for a while, and she didn't like it very much, and she said that again and again, to work as a treasurer for the Wilhelm Reich Infant Trust. So she was dealing with the archive of Wilhelm Reich and all the money issues and so on. She was very, in a way threatened and overwhelmed by all this work, and she really wanted to become rid of it. And in the end, Mary Higgins was taking that over. It's a known story. And so Eva could do her own stuff. From 1975 to 1992, Eva was teaching her work, the gentle bioenergetics, her development of the butterfly baby massage, and also the whole work and scientific background from her father, Wilhelm Reich, worldwide. She was traveling many, many times around the world. And she retired in a way in 1992. Then she said, I'm now too old, I'm too tired, I want to stay. I want to be I don't want to be anymore a famous person now. I want to be on my own. And she died in 2008. She had a period of strokes and different diseases. Maybe Renata will tell us more about that. So that is maybe a little map for people who haven't heard so much from Eva Reich, help you maybe. I give you some impressions of the background here. We see Eva on the left with her father, Wilhelm Reich. On the right hand is Annie Pink Reich, and Laura is also very small there. It is, this picture shows already, they had already crisis in that time. I think it was around 20, must be 1928, 29. So there was a lot of difficulties, and it's documented. And I see a little bit, I don't know, it's the emanation of that photo, it brings it a little bit out. Here we see Annie Pink Reich, in the middle is Eva, and on the right is Laura. And it is from a photo from Berlin. This is the photo a little later. I mean, in the period when Reich lived in Maine, in Organon, in Rangeley, and had the scientific center there. On the right is Ilse Ollendorf, his third wife, and on the left we see Eva, and I think it's Peter Reich, Reich's third child and his first son, and it was the child from Ilse and Wilhelm. As I said, Eva got very involved in the biological microscopic work, and in the end of the 40s, she was an important part of the student lab and laboratory, and she was did a lot of that work with the cancer process in that time. And again and again, when she was doing her workshop, she was connecting her therapeutic work with these insights. That's Eva Reich in his later days in Organon. And there we see also in the middle Eva. It's a summer conference, 1948 in Rangeley in USA, where Reich put people from the whole world together, meeting who were connected to his studies, his sexual, economic, and ergonomic research. Here we see Eva with her husband, Bill Moise, as the father of Renata. He was a painter, beautiful paintings he did, and so he was also connected with Reich's work. He was also assisting him in, especially in the cloud busting work, the weather work. He was also involved. So Eva met Bill Moise also in a laboratory meeting in the USA, and she settled down in Hancock in USA too. So Bill Moise died, I don't know, maybe Renata, you have to tell us later, and earlier than Eva. So they became a couple in the beginning of this, I think also in the late 50s. Then we see Eva one day she started to travel around. She was always all over the world, in Australia, in Europe, in America, South America. She was teaching the ergonomic science, the baby work all over the world. Just a few impressions. It was very hippie-like. So when you see the photos, it was she was in East Lane in California. She met a lot of people from the humanistic psychology field. So she was very, very interconnected. Eva Reich was really a networker, and it was very unusual, I would say, and in a way also very modern when we see it today, nowadays. So here, that is a typical scene where Eva on the mattress teaching. Her workshops were a mixture of teaching, working, and it was more it was a happening a little bit. It was theory, it was experience, it was very loving relationship in a way. It's a lovely touching quality in her life. It was very, very, I loved the way how she presented the work. Eva, when she was at home already, again in front of her house. And this is Renata with her mother, still alive. And that is Judyth with Eva together. Yeah. And I come later onto that picture. Okay, that is my little impression, introduction. So you have a little impression who Eva maybe was, how she has a little feeling for her before we now start about her life and also her personal career. So let's start. And maybe I ask Judyth. Hello, Judyth. Maybe you can give us a little bit about some information about your background. How did you come to Eva's work? Why were you attracted to get in contact with her? I heard that you came originally from the dance field, and so how did you come there? And why did you? What was good for you?
Wow. Let me first of all thank you, Thomas, for doing this. This has already been. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. This has already been so enjoyable for me to spend some time with Renata online and everything. And my meeting with Eva was very, very lucky. I would say, yes, I was a dancer. In the 60s, I went to Japan and lived for several years studying dance and also changing and being in a Zen monastery. And when I came back to California in 1968, a lot of different things were happening, and I no longer wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to work with people and help people. So I started studying. and I studied with Lowen and Paracas actually for a
Okay.
while, and that it didn't feel right to me. So I investigated and found Reich and found a Reichian therapist in San Francisco who was doing trainings.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I did the training twice because I didn't think it was enough. So I did it for several years. And my doctorate is in Reichian psychology. But also very interesting, in the 50s, I think there was a commune in Big Sur, not far from where Esalen Institute was, which was a lot of Reichian people. They lived together, they worked together. I didn't know them, and I don't remember how long it lasted and when it broke up. But in the 70s and 80s, there was still a group of them who met periodically in Berkeley, California. It was in a big house. I was invited. I don't exactly recall how, but I would go there. We would have a potluck dinner, and we would talk about either Reich's things or have guests. And Marcel Vogel, the Crystal Man, was a guest there, I remember. And one night it was Eva Reich, who was on her beginning leg of one of her trips, maybe her last trip around the world. And she spoke, and that was interesting. I had never met her before. And she needed a ride to the airport afterwards. She was on her way to Japan. And I offered to give her a ride to the airport. It was not near my house. It was in the opposite direction. It was going to take me hours to get home. But somehow I said, sure, I'll give you a ride. And so we were on the freeway, stuck in traffic, going to San Francisco Airport for more than an hour. I know it was maybe a couple of hours, and we're talking about all these things. And finally she says to me, so my dear, what kind of work do you do? And I thought, oh, now I'm really in trouble, because I know very, very clearly that Reich never wanted his work to be named after him. And so I'm driving along, and I took a big gulp, and I said, well, you may not know it, but here in California, we do call the work Reichian therapy, but over the years, I have integrated it with my other major work, which is sensory awareness, which comes from the work of Elsa Gindler, who I didn't expect her to know anything about. And she said, oh, my father would be so glad. And I took a deep exhalation. I felt a lot better. And from then on, we bonded and talked about so many, many things, about how she went to a Gindler school and just so many connections. And that's how I met Eva Reich. So she went off to Japan. I then afterwards took all of the workshops that she did. She was doing training workshops in Ohio. Mm-hmm. It was 1985, 86, 87 on. It was in Ohio. We also happened to be in Vienna at the same time at one time. So I had time to be with her in her birthplace. We would walk on the streets and she would tell me how it was back then. And she actually came and lived with me, trying to get away from the Maine winters for a while in California. And I visited her multiple times in Maine, meeting Renata and having a wonderful time. And she has been my great friend and mentor all these years since then.
Could you say, I just want to add one question. So when you say it sounds like a friendship also, and being a colleague and mentor, but what was the main thing where you were attracted from? What was the attraction? What would you say? Why were you so, I mean, you did already a lot of training, you were quite a mature person, and you were in the same age, I think, even how much younger you were, I don't know.
She's a bit older than me, at least a decade, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. it's hard not to be attracted to her energy. I think that you would agree with that.
Yes, I know.
And we had we were both mothers. We both were working, in similar fields. We had a lot to talk about at every time. And at the workshops in Ohio, we would stay up all night after the workshop and just talk and talk and talk about so many things, and spend many hours on the telephone too. There was a lot to connect around.
So what I heard is one point, and maybe we come later to that, is a Gindler background of your work. Yeah. You're trained by Charlotte Silver, and so I think this element could be a very important connection. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Very, very important, and I would be glad to talk about that.
Okay, we go on later for that. So Renata.
Oh, thank you. This is wonderful. Oh.
It's good to see you. And I was wondering, when I met Eva, my experience was in her workshops, every time when she came, she had something else in her suitcase, a new finding, a new technique, a new something. So she was very much looking for new, let's say, scientific findings for new development in the whole holistic medicine, and she was always looking how could interconnect that with the work of Reich, her father's work. So she was always integrating again and again. So if you sometimes I had the feeling, okay, now I have it, next time restart. I mean, it was again and again a quality of, okay, she was never stopping. And I was thinking, okay, that can be very curious as a daughter, having a mother around who's so busy, but it can also be restless maybe, or something like, oh, she's doing this and that. And how was she as a mother? I mean, not as a therapist, let's start from the private aspect. Yeah.
Right. She and my father, one thing I wanted to correct is that my parents became a couple in around 1949.
Oh, okay.
When they met, my father was the personal assistant and secretary to Wilhelm Reich. So he was working for Wilhelm Reich at the exact time that my mother came to start to study. And my mother was actually married to her first husband at that time, who was pictured in the group picture around the table with Peter. And that marriage ended. It was not as happy a marriage as it could have been, and she and my father were immediately sort of a love match. Anyway, long story. So I was raised, with self-regulation, which they did. I felt that it worked in that context, in that situation, on a small farm in Maine. I was an only child. My mother she was 35, nearly 36 years old when she had me, and she'd been trying to have a baby for 10 years. So I was very much, so the time of her father dying, her giving the trust responsibility away, getting pregnant and having me was all in a very short period of time. So I think when she had me, she was very depressed because she'd been through this, like a war, when they were persecuted and Wilhelm Reich went to prison. But in what she told me and what she did right, having a child was very healing. She didn't have me in order to heal. That's not a good reason to have a child, but the effect of being pregnant, having a baby, living with nature, it changed her dramatically. So my childhood was very idyllic to a certain point, as a young child. So it's a very close father, mother, gardens, animals, farm animals, growing our own food, being allowed to express myself. Unfortunately, like as life happens, the marriage just dissolved, exploded, ended. So my father had affairs, and she found out, and all that happened when I was around 12. So at that time, like what can happen is that children sometimes have one side that they're more sort of attached to than the other, or because of circumstances. So that caused my mother and I to not be close. Well, not immediately, but I was close to her for a couple of years after that. But then she began her traveling, and I stayed on the farm with my father, who was an artist, and I was a teenager and self-regulating with, as teenagers do. And so Eva was an incredibly amazing person. And she could also be incredibly powerful. Like, her emotions were incredibly powerful. So the emotions around the breakup of the marriage, because she loved him so much and continued till the end of her life, were incredibly powerful. And so that's a very stormy part of the whole thing that I'm choking up thinking about it. But now, as a woman myself of 60 and thinking back, her age, her husband, everything, of course, these emotions were very big. And so in the years when she traveled, I stayed in Hancock, and she would travel. And in the summer, she would come back while my dad was still alive and stay in the house, in the farm. And he had a painting studio. So here's the farm and here's the painting studio. When they got divorced, he moved the painting studio to the other side of the barn and attached it. And they cut the property into two pieces, and they still talked, and they were, they were always in communication and cared about each other. But so she would come in the summer and stay in the house, and then she would leave, and I stayed there. And anyway, so I'm getting off track. But yes, she was always interested in everything and learning, and through the years I still have enormous piles, not piles, they're in drawers, but file cabinets of things she cut out of magazine. In those days there was no internet, so everything she was learning, she was cutting out of a magazine or an article, a journal. The people around the world, as she traveled, she was talking to people and learning.
Okay, can I ask you something? So what I'm just was interested in is if you were part of the traveling or where you were. So
yeah, I wasn't. She and I did, after their marriage broke, then she and I did travel around the world. We took about 4 months, and that was not. But she took me in Fiji, she took me to birth control clinics. And, while she was traveling, she was still learning. And we went to the Maasai and went and talked to the mothers in the huts, and she talked to them about how they gave birth and that kind of stuff. So we did that. But after that, no. And my father died when I was 20. He died suddenly. So then my mother and my relationship became close again. And
Okay, maybe it's good to have this personal background, maybe from the two of you. So I would like to switch over to Eva's work and maybe her influence of Wilhelm Reich's work. I mean, it's very hard to understand Eva's work without the background of Wilhelm Reich. I mean, they are very much interconnected, these two aspects. I want to ask Judyth, I mean, what I felt was when I met Eva, I mean, even few years before she died, I think even months before she died, when I found her, I felt always a little bit, a little fight in her between this fight for autonomy on the one hand, and being very loyal with the studies and the research of her father, and she was in a way even battling for the acknowledgement of her father's work. And so on the one hand, she was very much using terms in her work like pulsation, the life energy, the armoring, all these different elements. On the other hand, I saw a tendency to create her own world. It was another way. So what would you sing? You know, how was that? I mean, could you say something about how much was she a Reichian? And didn't she want to be a Reichian? And what way she want to do just by focusing more on the pre and perinatal aspect to do her own stuff? And she called her work gentle bioenergetics.
How much? I would say 100% to both. I always felt that she was 100% a Reichian and 100% Eva Reichian, you might say.
Mm.
I always bugged her about the choice of her term because I thought the term gentle bioenergetics made people think about Lowen.
Yes.
And bioenergetics. And I said, why do you use that term? And she said, I really want to, you know, she insisted upon it. She wouldn't let me influence her to change it. But I felt that I know she had a lot of conflicts more in the beginning years. By the time I met her in 85, and you met her around that too. You said 87. I felt that a lot of her differences was, quite frankly, because she was a woman.
Yes.
And she would see things and approach things and respond to things in different ways that a man, especially Wilhelm Reich, would never have approached to. She was more open. She was more gregarious, I would think. But I didn't have any conflict with it. Having studied so much about Reich before even meeting her, it was just, well, here we go. And the world was so different.
Yes.
You mentioned it, the hippies. I mean, I wasn't a hippie, but there were so many people, so many things going on, and the growth movements and various things that all came into her consciousness. And she was so open and able to, you know, my hands can't even, you know, make the sign. She was able to really encompass all of it. Yeah. And she would see something, I mean, the metamorphosis massage, and, you know, take it in, she would sort of gulp it in and it would come out Eva Reich, and this other thing, and all of these things. And they really worked well. But without her huge personality, they wouldn't have worked so well.
Yeah, that's what I think. I mean, I could see I was mainly in the beginning trained by the father's background, and I see, in a way, although she integrated different methods and approaches, it was always, in a way, a kind of organ therapy with different approaches. It was always, again, energy work again and again. So it doesn't matter if she did polarity, metamorphosis, or whatever, cranial work. She did it her way. So what I see, I felt Eva a little bit like the female aspect in the ergonomy. I mean, the missing link in ergonomy. And so I would say that is something, this gentleness, the resonance, this heart relation. I mean, I see that, I saw that very clearly. And the only thing what I see with this term she used was the gentle bioenergetics and all this misunderstanding around that bioenergetic work that disconnected her a little bit more than necessary from these fields where she came from her family field. So, yeah.
And maybe that's one of the reasons she did it.
Yeah, could be.
She definitely wanted to emphasize the gentle.
Yeah.
But the bioenergetic maybe, you know, gave the space away from the Reiki and everything and into the world, which was very largely bioenergetics and so many other things that were happening.
Okay. I mean, we know from her work that she was, for example, very different. I mean, it was a male aspect in Reichian work, which was, let's say, had a lot of aspect. He was very strong, and it was a very, let's say, confronting work, and the vegetal therapy and then later organ therapy, although there were different aspects, but her melting way of dealing with physical and emotional armoring, that was a very different element. I mean, working below the defenses, for example, that was something that absolutely was missing in the classical Reichian field in that time, at least, yeah, maybe even today. So I see that too, that she had this tendency, this drive really to kind of individuation and to find her own way to be her on her own. So I like that.
She had to, rightfully so, she did it. Yes.
And on the other side, she was so loyal with the work of her father. I mean, she was teaching that again and again and again, I suppose. And she had trouble also. I saw a lot of trouble, sometimes also some guilt. Gee, I should write more. I don't write. I should write books, for example. She was a little big, heavy package on her shoulders. I felt that even. Okay, Renata, the other side, I mean, also when you look to the literature, you always, we find a lot of quotes and content around Eva's work and connection with Wilhelm Reich's work. But what about Annie Pink's work? Annie Pink, she was a psychoanalytic person. She was even a quite famous person in the field. And in the Reichian literature, Annie Pink was a little bit the bad one. I mean, she let's say she was the one who's speaking out rumors and spreading out, let's say, rumors about Reich. He could be schizophrenic. There was always something like she was involved in that. So she was a little bit the bad person. And when you read a lot of biographies, but when you go deeper and deeper in, and when I read Laura's biography, for example, she just published in Germany, or reading more in the archives, I saw there are a lot more relations between her mother and her. And so what would you say? What was Annie's influence on Eva?
It's a huge question. So I'll sort of think little pieces of it at a time. They had a very Eva and Annie had a very conflicted relationship because of what you mentioned, with Annie having so much anger at Wilhelm Reich for his, how that marriage fell apart, how it went with the children, how it went with the escaping Hitler, how it went once they were in the United States. But Annie Reich, in her own way, was apparently a very insightful psychoanalyst and very good at what she did. But she and Eva were very estranged for many, many years because of Wilhelm Reich. Eva was in her early 20s and decided to be with learn her father's work more. Then the relationship with Annie and Eva became very difficult. So I don't think professionally Eva went to her and learned or that kind of thing, but I'm sure being brought up by a woman who was so intelligent and such, interesting, thoughts and worked as a psychoanalyst, I'm sure had a reaction, had a help to Eva. Eva, when I was born, then the relationship sort of reconnected between Eva and Annie. Mm-hmm. But by that time, Annie Reich had a stroke, but did go back to work. But she died when I was 10 or 11. So one thing that was very interesting to think about is Eva was, and you probably know this, both Judyth and Thomas, Eva was such a humble person. Mm-hmm. She thought of herself as a peasant, and she was. It wasn't anything she was putting on for like play acting, but she was in the garden. She wore, had the dirt on her hands, and her mother was an opposite of that. Annie her apartment was this beautiful apartment at Central Park West in New York City. Beautiful rugs, things that she had made money. Annie had become a well-known, coming as a refugee with no money. She had made this. So Eva and Bill, my dad, were quite poor and lived this sort of rustic peasant life. And anyway, that's an interesting difference. So I think it's sad to me to think that Eva and her mother were so estranged, or there was so long that Eva and her father were estranged. So working with parents and babies like you do, Thomas, and I do, you can see nobody's life is only their professional work. It's always their loves, their family, their life, their passions, and their work.
Yeah, and I was wondering, because Eva's work is so much connected to this, let's say, caring quality, mothering, and what I heard when she was talking in many, many different presentations she did, she never mentioned this background of her, let's say, psychoanalytic background. She always mentions the psychoanalytic work of her father, the early work in Vienna. Maybe her mother was mentioned in the sexual reforming work around the counseling centers, but that was it. I mean, although I found it out much later that she was such a well-known person in America. I mean, you could have been proud of her when you would be a daughter of her, but she didn't talk so much about that. So I was wondering. Okay. So another thing, when I met Eva, and what she was always reporting, and she was always very open with her personal biography, and it's very similar to her father's life. There was always an impulse to improve things, to make it better, to find new solutions. I would even say her crisis were always, it seemed to be a source of to be transformed in the professional field. I mean, and one aspect she was talking about was her own therapeutic career as a client, as a patient. And I mean, maybe people don't know that, but Eva was sent into children's psychotherapy, psychoanalytic psychotherapy, in the late 20s, when this period of divorce, of the separation started. And Annie Pink's friend, it was Berta Bornstein. She was a colleague and friend of Annie Pink in that time. And she was quite well-known child therapist, and she was trained by Anna Freud. And so she has done the child therapy, and there already was a lot of doubts. What is going on with Wilhelm Reich? Is he fine? Is he okay? How he's dealing? And they said, okay, Annie and Berta, and I found this also in the archives, they both were, let's say, together in their opinion, Eva needs support. There were also signs from her behavior, and so she needs support. But Eva was reporting that they used her, let's say, her stories and her reports and her narratives in the therapy they used it against Wilhelm Reich, for example. So she was reporting secret stuff, and that, so it was a kind of conspiracy a little bit, even that. And Eva said there was a strong tendency in the therapy to convince her that it's not good to be too much together with her father, and she should avoid to be with him. And she said always, again and again, it's a brainwashing what they did with me. Yeah, there was something in the psychoanalytic field. And later on in the primal therapy, in the organ therapy, she said also it was a cracking of my armor. It was too invasive. It was too strong. I was a very sensitive person. It was a kind of smashing. Again, quite, I would say, intense experience. Also in the later work of her father in the organ therapy, classical organ therapy. She was not talking so positively about that. She said, so both experiences, you could say even it's like a traumatic psychotherapy experience. So I was wondering if her tendency so much being interested in the humanistic psychology, looking for other ways, contacting people, to be together with clients in another way, in a more equal way, in a trustful way, in a more open, transparent way. Do you think it was connected to these experiences? Do you think that was a background which led her, or was it more in general, hippie, let's say, health movement in that time was What was the reason? What was the motivation? What would you think, Renata?
Who were you asking?
Hmm?
I think he's asking you, Judyth. I have something to say after Judyth says what she says.
Judyth.
So Eva told me more than once that she felt that they were trying to really drive her to insanity in the therapy. In the beginning, she was really, really angry about that.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're talking now, Thomas, of how the orgonomy was too fast and everything, I thought maybe that's where the term gentle, comes in.
Yes.
You had to acknowledge that you can't just blast through no matter what you do or see, but gentle, self-regulation, and all of that. So that was very, very important for her to have survived both of those things and come out with her own way of being and working.
So you would say this experience was a very, very strong element to go into this contradiction in a way. So, yeah, okay.
Yes.
So just to add to that, during the time of her brainwashing, over years, she was much of that time living in a children's home that was, I think Greta Fried was the name of the woman, and children of analysts went to live there and be analyzed. So it was an incredibly intense situation. And just what I think about why Eva, why her life turned out the way it did with her going around the world and teaching and having such an unusual life had to do with several factors. Because of the Orono experiment, she was very sensitive and allergic to radiation, so being around x-rays, etc. So it made it very hard for her to work in a hospital. Mm-hmm. And also Wilhelm Reich's ideas, the orgone energy blanket, etc. She even tried to bring that into her as an intern in New York City. And of course they were like, what are you doing? So she also, when she graduated, she couldn't get malpractice insurance. So all of these things because of Wilhelm Reich. So it forced her into a different life than getting a job as a doctor in a hospital. She came to Maine, she did her life then with the marriage breaking up. After that, she didn't go directly into teaching about Wilhelm Reich. She went and studied astronomy. She was a mathematician and very interested in Wilhelm Reich's, his mathematical theories that had to do with the whole formation of the universe, which I don't understand or know anything about. And then, it was only then, after that didn't work out, then she tried to do home birth in Maine and tried to get hospital privileges to be able to, take the person to the hospital. And she they wouldn't give that to her. And then she started teaching and expanding, and then her life opened up. So,
okay. So that is also a background in how finding her way in this more alternative medicine. Yeah. So okay. Yes. Let's maybe go back to the Reichian background because the Ergonomic Infant Research Center, Reich's late work with, let's say, the last therapeutic approach he did was, he was mainly a natural scientist. He was mainly a life researcher. And then he started, at the age of 50, he started getting very interested in babies and parents. And he was not a classical baby therapist. He was more interested to protect the living process, so self-regulation from the beginning on. And Eva came at that time to her father, and I asked her also that, were you part of that project, this baby project, the Children of the Future project? And she said, no, I wasn't, but I was listening to the meetings. And so we know Eva, she discovered this gentle baby massage. Let's say she said very often, when Judyth, maybe you know it, and Renata, you too. It is a kind of gentle vegetal therapy. It's gentle way of organ therapy and a very easy way for the wide public, and that's to bring it out and to popularize that these ideas. So, and I heard Eva saying that she saw her father working with pregnant women, and she said once also with a baby, where he was very, very gentle in working. It was a very, very easygoing work. And I found it in the archives when Myron Sharaff was reporting that in some files, that he worked very different than normally in his style of organ therapy he did. So I was asking myself, okay, where did she got this impulse besides this biographic background on the content level? So I thought maybe was her interest in the baby and the observation also something she took again from these observations in her father to bring it in her work? What was her main idea and her main motivations to go into the work with the babies? Do you know anything about it? I asked you both. I mean,
I do, and Judyth, you can too. It was to try to bring about a new humanity, rather than through politics. Like we said, it was because with the pregnancy and the newborn, there's the full functioning of the organism, and that what we do, or most we still do, to birth and to pregnancy and to babies and young children, damages or interferes with that real expression of their humanity. And she felt that when this could be a more natural way, we would then have people that grew up who were appalled by violence and could not imagine war, and that would change humanity. So that was where it all, in my opinion, came from.
Okay, but that is something which was very much in agreement with that what her father said in The Children of the Future. I mean, the baby was the protection of the unborn and newborn child, let's say, the understanding of staying with the healthy functioning and with the healthy biological and emotional functioning in the child, to protect that is these, let's say, the basis of all social change. So that's interesting that you say that was much more her thrive to go into that field. So in a way, she was a kind of also a treasurer of this idea, of this late idea of the infant research of her father. I haven't heard that so clearly. Okay, thank you. Judyth, maybe you can add something. So what were you saying? What role had the baby in Eva Reich professionally, and what is the importance of the baby in Eva? Because it was always very, very important thing she was talking about. So what do you think? Why was it chosen? Would you agree with Renata, or would you add something?
I agree completely. And I wanted to ask Renata, I always thought that she got the baby massage from someone else. Do you know that?
No, I think she just, as we've said, she sort of took different ideas from different places and tried them out. And the touch, the butterfly, that very, like as if you touch a butterfly wing so delicately, right, was, and she had a gift, I think, for working with pregnant women and babies. So that with the knowledge and the gift, and she was very spiritual also. So I think there was a certain spiritual, a universal great spirit belief that she had that helped her she didn't have ever secretaries or anybody helping her go around the world with all these, groups and teaching. It just, she trusted, and it worked out.
She surely did. And how brilliant it was, because there are so many people that are using it or saying that they've done it, the different baby massages and everything, but how brilliant it was of her. I mean, there was the orgone accumulator. You make these little muffs or blankets or pillowcases or anything, and you can put it on people. You could put it on a baby, but that's not the same thing as being touched. So her being able to take this light touch, gentle and circular, that's important too, massage, brings so much more to the baby. I mean, human contact, so many things are included in that work of this gentle butterfly massage. It was really, really brilliant.
Yes, and I would say, I mean, her work, and that was something I was very much attracted to see this very, very gentle work. I mean, this delicate, really touch, how strongly that opened these core reactions. I mean, coming really to a core functioning, and that is something which is always it strikes me again and again when I work with babies, how easy and this goes, how you come to this deep contact with the baby, and which is very heart-related quality very quickly and in a very open field. And I see, I mean, that is the antithesis to this more strong work. And on the other side, what the second thing is, I mean, I know it also from my work, when you do it and it goes very quickly, and even her father said that, it's not a big problem to open up a baby by a good contact. But what happens is very quickly, these very early relational backgrounds are arising. So like, say, the traumatic background of the birth, of the pregnancy, and the different elements of relational stress which were happening in that early time. So baby is expressing it immediately. So, and I would say this transformation of human beings, this new humanity and this change of human being, you can really observe so clearly what is possible in a baby. And maybe I would say, and I would ask you, Judyth, because you're also very much related to the pre and perinatal work and perinatal psychology, that she was so much interested in the pregnancy, in the birth aspects, and also in the baby work to bring that out, so making a trauma release. Would you also say it's mainly because of this strive to make it, to change, to find a new humanity, or because it's the main point where it was really different to the classical orgonomy and organ therapy? So why are you saying this came so much into the front?
I would say it came on both levels, the massive, the worldly level of trying to, help create a new humanity, a healthier humanity, and also down to the minuteness of contact, probably verbal contact too, to that baby. If you're that close and if you're moving with them, however the baby's responding, you're going to respond. Eye contact, all of these things that are so important. Mm-hmm. And now, interestingly enough, I mean, Eva attended the very first international conference of what is now the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Health. It was, I don't know what it was called back then, but she was there. It was 1983 in Toronto. She attended the conference. I found the program at her house, Renata, when I was helping cleaning up and everything. So she was there wanting to take it out into the world and into home with the babies. It was definitely her, one of her great missions. And so very, very important. The sad thing now is that in the trainings, and there's so much of it and everything, we emphasize eye contact, prosody, the tone of voice. Not very many people focus or teach about the touch. And Eva's gentle butterfly massage could very well and needs to be added
I
to
think,
the
yeah.
important points of being careful and so present with these newborns especially.
Okay. So what I think is, I mean, Eva was, that was something I found, and where she was, again, similar to what her father did, was not just staying on the baby therapy level. She was not even a baby therapist at all, I would say. It was more using it as prevention, using that tools to use it in a mass-wide way for people that they can take it and use it with their babies. So I didn't see her so much as a classical baby therapist. So no. And one thing is, she was also, I mean, she did birth work. That is a big difference to nowadays baby therapists. She was in the same time medical doctor. She has the background and as a medical doctor in birthing. And I was wondering how did she connect, let's say, the armoring and the role of sexuality suppression on the one hand, the birth problems and the baby problems. And I've heard her talking about knotting it together, like her father was also doing. So let's say the armoring of the pelvis because of all the repression that makes it much harder to let the self-regulation in the birth go, to deepen your breath, and that creates a lot of tension in this area. And what would you say, starting with Judyth and then ask Renata, how did she connect these fields, sexuology, perinatal psychology, and the therapeutic field?
I'm smiling because one of the things where she does not agree with her father, and I agree with her, I mean, before meeting her, well, in the 60s, as I said, I had been in a Buddhist monastery for a year and a half, and we were talking about energy and energy flow and how important it was for Reich and so many Reichians that there be that sexual activity, that orgasm is so important. And we sat as, like I said, she was a little bit older than me, but not that much older, as single women. We had both had children, but we were not married or in relationships. And I said, Eva, I don't think that's so necessary all the time, all of that orgasmic release. And she said, well, I said that there are other ways to release that energy. And surely in a Zen monastery, there are many ways to release that energy. And she would agree with me that it wasn't just that sexual release. There needed to be a release. There needed to be that self-regulation, all of that energetic movement. But it doesn't have to be just this, maybe I should say a narrow, maybe more masculine focus.
Yes.
Whereas we as women opened it up and could accept it in many different ways.
So you mean this narrow view that your, let's say, orgasmic functioning is the main element in an understanding and Reichian understanding of health, for example, genitality concept, for example.
Right.
That
right.
is okay. So this discharging element of that, so that you would say it's more a widening of different elements. So she was not in line with what her father said, and that I heard that, but I only heard on the other side the impact of pelvic muscular, let's say, contractions and armoring in that area is weakening, let's say, the bioenergetic emotional condition of an unborn baby. I mean, that, she said again and again, that was, let's say, a biosocial environment of the baby, which was weakened through the structural holdings of a mother she had from her own biography. I mean, there I saw a lot of alliance with
yes.
Maybe Renata, you want to say something to that?
I do. So the basis of her whole life had, and her beliefs and so forth, were Wilhelm Reich's work, and her going out, even when she was a country doctor in Hancock, she used his medical ergonomy with her regular medical training to treat people. So it's not like two pieces. It's like a cake. So his work is the bottom big part of the cake. And then as she went out into the world feeling like she was the only person trying to teach his work, she began herself to incorporate the things she'd already learned and learn more as she worked with more people. The sexuality, so I totally agree with Judyth about she was able to see it, his work, but also the work with mothers and babies from a more female, experiential, and Eva understood very much what it doesn't really seem like Wilhelm Reich understood, which was the issue that when you have little children, who's going to take care of them? Who's going to be the parents? It doesn't really work if you have total sexual freedom of both parents and they can just go, it doesn't, then the mother ends up being the main caretaker. The whole thing doesn't work in that way. So I think Eva also had feelings that certainly humans, young people, whoever should have freedom of sexual expression, but also the deep love that comes with it that Reich also did speak about, where it isn't just sex, it's connection of organisms. But Eva, I think, added into that the bonding part, that couples bonding, and of course mothers and baby, that it's not as disposable as it somehow seems if you just read Reich and some of his stuff about, oh, this couple's together, but now they're tired of each other and they go, So what I'm hearing from you, Judyth, to me strikes like certain biological phases, perhaps, in human lives. And my experience with younger patients who are reproductive age, all that, is that the sexual flow is quite important. And what Thomas is saying about the armoring affecting the birth, making muscles very tight, making things not work as well, maybe affecting the fetus on the inside. I think that's, and so I think being able to be orgasmic in that situation is important. But then in my own life, I am still partnered, but I do see how, as an older woman, like creativity and thought and things like this can become like, it's okay to not think about orgasm for a few, that kind of thing. It's not, so I think there's a biological thing in life maybe that maybe women are different than men too in this. There's testosterone that's different than the estrogen. So maybe you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, maybe I just put it together in a way like what you try maybe to express, or what I heard is in the Reichian tradition, there was not really an understanding of what we call nowadays attachment or bonding. There was a long-term, safe relationship where you can come back. So the role of a safe relationship, in a way, was not that much underlined. It was more stressed the point of pleasureful contact in the moment, and let's say pleasureful expansion, being together. So let's say that is the sexual pleasureful aspect, and the classical Reichian, let's say, theory was very much focusing on the body pleasure aspect, and I think it's very important, this expansion and this element. But it is embedded in a long-term point, let's say, of an emotional energetic field, which is long-lasting and which is very important, that the child can relate back again and again and again for years until the development is really ended. And I think that now what we're maybe putting together is these two sides. It's a kind of polarity of two things. It's on the one hand the attachment element, which is very much related to security, on feeling safe. On the other side is the sexual aspect, which is the expansion, which is the early pleasure in the breastfeeding and the sucking, So we have now these two things are not two different areas. It's the same thing at the same time. So, and it was always, in my feeling, in the Reichian field, it was a split. And Eva was a little bit more connected to this, let's say, already bonding thing. And I saw the Reichian field was more, a little bit more focusing on the, let's say, natural functioning. So, and I think security was not the theme, which was so much in the center of Reich's idea. So maybe I feel like female, male, it's again a kind of integration could happen when you put these two things together.
It's just what I was going to say and thinking a lot. It's so masculine and feminine.
Yes.
And hallelujah that Eva Reich was loud enough and big enough and busy enough to bring the feminine into the integration of all of this. Yeah.
So you mentioned it. There was another thing which was absolutely in contradiction where her father came from, and even her parents, in the beginning at least, they were very anti-religious. I mean, spirituality and Christianity and all that was really something like that. They didn't want that. They were very much influenced from them by the Marxistic ideas, and they were atheists, and they were not, so they, at least in that early times in Vienna and Berlin, Eva was talking a lot. She was not allowed to pray, she not to go into the church. And then she had this nanny, Mitzi. Mitzi was it, lovely Mitzi, that was her name. And I think she came from Vienna, and she was the one. And I love that quote, when you're really alone, and I think Eva was very often alone in that time because her parents, they were not very attached in a way. From the attachment point of view, it was a very attachment weak quality in that time. I have to say that. I mean, I was, in a way, it was from a perspective from the children, there was also a tragic part in it. But Mitzi, the nanny, said, okay, when you don't know what to do, you can pray for yourself, and you can contact something, you can contact to God. So she was always saying that. She had a very strong spirituality, and let's say in another way, it was not the classical way. It was more natural spirituality. It was more maybe even a little animistic and shamanistic, but it was transpersonal element was very strong. Well, maybe you can say something to that, because that is also something I see. It was different, at least what I heard and I've seen in Wilhelm Reich's work.
Yeah,
Judyth, may you want?
I'll say you're right. Yes, and she did incorporate that into individual therapy at times. I think with patients or people who she was working with bioenergetic baby, gentle energetic therapy, and sometimes she would get to a point or there was a certain type of crisis occurring, and she would pray with them during the therapy. So that yes, that was, and it's true, very true, everything you've said, and yes, her parents were atheists, and that was. It made her who she was.
How were you raised? Were you raised with praying?
I'm not in any, not really, but I was raised to have a feeling, a sense of a great power in the universe, and I have that now. So. But with not dogma, but with a sense of that there is this power, this spirit that I'm just a little piece of, and that each person is a little piece of. But I can bring more of it to me anyway. I don't know how to or pray for people. Send thoughts that maybe in some way could help.
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw it very, very strong. I was a little bit shocked when I was a young student and I saw that she was praying in the therapy room. I thought, oh, she's crazy what she's doing there. I mean, I was happy to be away from all this stuff. And then this woman, I liked her, what she was talking, but for me, it was a grandmother, and she started praying. I said, oh, no, that's too much. I mean, that's just too much. But nowadays, I get closer. I see this, even the way how she did it, like, let's say, to make yourself open for something which coming to you, like an information, call it what you want. Say, I want to contact to get in a bigger thing. And so now I get really a sympathy for that. I love that. But I had to get older for that.
Actually, in the workshops, I would hear her say sometimes, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to pray. And I went, it was very shocking to me too.
Okay. So I just have to go back to the beginning, to the Gindler thing, Judyth.
Oh,
I mean, you are the Gindler's expert. And I was thinking, okay, I mean, Elsa Lindenberg was a dancer in Berlin. She was trained by Laban, and also she was taught by as a Gindler in that time. Yes. So she had her community there. Mm-hmm. And Charlotte Selver, your teacher, was very much trained and in connection with Elsa Gindler too. And so what would you say? I was interested, okay, how much is Gindler work in a way in Eva's work represented? What were you saying?
Well, I say a lot. Not only Eva's work, but Wilhelm's work.
Okay.
The article that was written, you probably know Ulf.
Yeah, I know.
And Michael.
Hello.
Yes. So we had this great big fight because on my website, I say that I heard Michael say that Annie took Wilhelm to work with Gindler for summer sessions in the 30s. And I thought, that never happened. And it never did happen. But Eva would tell me over and over and over about the times, the good times in the countryside when they would go for picnics on the weekend. And Otto Fennekel was Wilhelm Reich's best friend. So Claire Fennekel and Otto and Annie and Wilhelm and the girls, and they would go on the picnics. Claire Fennekel was a student of Gindler, and Otto was sort of interested, and so he went one class to a Gindler class, and the migraine headaches that he had been having were gone. So he was a convert and very happy to be with that. And Eva would say that they would go along on the picnics, and over and over, Wilhelm would say to them, now tell me, what is this that you do? And of course, they couldn't explain it much. So I don't know that he really got a sense of that, but certainly through Elsa Lindenberg.
Yeah, I think so too. And we try to find out that also in the Reich archives, if there's anything written down, there's a little bit, definitely there was an influence by Elsa Lindenberg from that work, especially this exploring work, this more, let's say, like to explore the experience in the body, to really let the movement come, and that a lot of that stuff, the breathing and the role of the breathing in that time, it was there are a lot of quotes in his diaries or in his lectures he did in Scandinavia, for example.
Right. And when we were researching that article, we became pretty clear that if it weren't for Elsa Lindenberg, Reichian therapy would be very, very different.
That could be, yeah. So
really introduced into him the sense of the movement and the energy and the even the armor and everything. So we owe a lot, but they never met.
Yeah, a pity. The female aspect of body psychotherapy or somatic psychotherapy. Yeah. Okay, Renata, maybe you want to say something to that? Did Eva talk about that with you?
Oh, she never did. So I'm very interested to hear Judyth and you talk about it. So thank you.
You used to talk about
maybe we have a little bit time aspect and look to the time. A very important thing in Eva's work, and let's say a concept or something was headline was Battle for New Humanity. We talked a little bit about that. She was really someone who was looking for a new consciousness, for something to overcome this very masculine patriarchal ways. She was looking for another way of social systems, a way of other ways of relating to each other, and another attitude to nature in general. I mean, she had a lot of that. She was like her father, a Goethean. She was very influenced by Goethe in a way. So I see that. It was very certain, an element of a very strong emotional quality in contact with nature, and nature, an observer of nature. And the way of being in contact with nature and being in contact with a cloud and the sky and being in contact with a baby or with a human being, I saw it's always this very similar thing in her. So what would you say? Maybe the last thing. What was that? Why this battle for new humanity? Why it was such a thing, strong, let's say, philosophy or Eva had? What was her hope?
Her hope was that there could be a world that expressed love and was appalled by violence, and that it wasn't an intellectual thought, it was just a human response. And I think she had glimpsed that through this kind of care and gentle gardening of babies and young children, that this could occur. And so she hoped it could occur one person at a time. And I think she'd be really not happy now from the whole world, but very happy from Thomas, what you're doing, and Judyth, your work. So
okay,
I have the feeling that she was able, to a great extent, probably not everything, to overcome the masculine tyranny, you might say, in her own life, and be able to expand into different aspects and be able to bring it out into the world. And she just wanted to extend that for everyone, for the new humanity. And that was her generosity. And she had, they both had such big personalities, I'm sure. I never met Wilhelm Reich, but certainly Eva did have the big enough personality that she could do that around the world. And there are, institutes named after her all over the place. And people still remember her being there. So, And there, I think, like in this article, she starts with quotes and talking about her father, what he says about prevention and about self-regulation. And at the end of the article, and it's not a long article, she talks about it from herself. Yeah. Again, using the same words, prevention and self-regulation. So she's got it. She overcame a lot and she was able to integrate it. Unlike anyone else I can think of, actually.
Thank you. I think that is something I love so much, in that I think why she is such an important, even a little bit forgotten pioneer. I mean, that's a tragedy that there's so little, that she wrote so little, and maybe that is so hard. I mean, we are now witnessing her, and we can talk about it. That was also something to bring her back into public. And what I saw, and that is a pioneering thing, is that she brought the insights of therapy, of baby therapy, related that back to the bigger system level, to the society level, to our culture. That is not a thing just to resolve and release traumas in babies. I mean, or doing this. It's not about baby therapy. It's about human beings. It's about how we live together. And babies and early relationships are good models for another way of being together. I like that. So that is something I always heard that very clearly in Eva's talking. So that.
Yeah. And you say that she is not remembered as well as we would probably like. But I'm very grateful to the editors of that amazing book that first came out in Germany, the Handbook of Body Psychotherapy, that, so Wilhelm Reich is the father of all this body somatic psychotherapy. Elsa Gindler clearly is the mother. And they really wanted to have something of Eva's in there. And Eva said, I don't want to write anything. So she asked me to take that old article of hers and edit it. And I'm so grateful to them that she is in there. So she hasn't been forgotten.
No, that's very good. And I think it's very important that she is embedded in the history of body psychotherapy. Definitely. So last thing, we have a last picture we want to
Great.
and I want to hear the story, how that picture came together. And I mean, Eva already quite old and also sick and at home in her house.
Yeah.
Renata,
She had a stroke of her spine right around 2001, and she couldn't walk, but we kept her in our home and cared for her. And the first Iraq War had begun, and it was appalling, and she was very upset. And my husband and I were going to go protest in the local town, and she couldn't go, so we made her a sign for herself and had her hold it.
Her way to give a sign and to protest against that. Okay.
You had been bedridden, but she was still very active and very potent.
Yes, she was. And she was, her whole life was in so many ways just absolutely inspiring. And this picture, I think, says it all.
I love this picture. It's really, maybe it brings it together how much she was involved till the end. I mean, really to bring it out and to say what is important and really fighting for a peaceful world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, ladies. I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, it was a pleasure. Really, I loved that talk. I mean, I could go on for hours, and that was really great. And thank you very much. I think it was worth, because there was so much talk about Wilhelm Reich and all the Reichian thing. I mean, there's so little talk about this important person and her work, and it was important for me. And I heard how important definitely she was for you too. And so thank you for that, to share this talk. Yeah.
Thank you for asking us and for thinking of this talk.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for your work you're doing, Thomas. It's wonderful. And Judyth.
Maybe we have a few minutes, 5 minutes maybe. If there's something in the audience, we were so much in the talk, I wanted to let open a few minutes for people. Maybe we are there, people who want to stay there. Not very long, but we have to end then. But maybe one of the people in the audience want to ask Renata or Judyth something, and we could answer.
That's okay.
Yes, I want to say something.
Hello.
Hello. I was so happy the whole time. And maybe you can see the photo behind of me.
Yes,
can you see this?
Oh, Johanna, I can. Yes.
And
I'm going to cry.
Because you are like my sister, I know.
Thank you. Oh, it's good to see you. So this is great, Thomas, that you have brought people that know Eva for many and worked with Eva, and we're all here.
And it's so great because it's the place she was staying for weeks or months, or I don't know exactly, for a long time, every winter.
Yes.
And it's the same place I sitting now on the table. Yes.
Oh.
And so I am really glad.
Yes, thank you. Yes. So after Eva stopped going on her traveling teaching, she did go to Vienna every winter and stay at Johanna's home.
I know Johanna very well, so we are good friends.
Yes, we are in contact, and I also in contact with Renata. But I'm so glad to have the phrase from Judyth now, because I know the name. Yes, and all the stories you told, Thomas. In the same or in another way, because you are Thomas and Renata, you are the daughter. It's so it's so near to me, because she told me so many stories, and we went around in Vienna and so on. So thank you,
Johanna. That photograph you have of Eva.
Yes,
I took the photograph.
You did it.
I did it.
Oh, I like it so much. Yes, I like it so much, and it's near the place from Nelson Mandela. They are in the same place. So, yes.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Maybe someone else want to add something. Okay. It's a quietness, a good quietness now. Maybe it's enough for today. And again, let's close up and thank you for this really nice evening. And I learned a lot, and it's also something I like, talking with people and getting impulses and hearing new stuff. And I had new stories I never heard. Thank you. And maybe I hope that you maybe appreciated also that. Next time I'll maybe spread the word a little bit more in the end. Next time we have this one in 24th of March with Dirk Beckendorf. We talk about the art of listening. This is also but in German, and it's about resonance, dissonance, and closing up, auditive basics of human communication. And so it's, let's say, another theme, like how we listen to the world, and maybe another good theme to talk about. So that's the next time where you could come. Thank you. Have a good evening, good dreams, sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Yeah.
Bye.
And this one is taped, so we put it in the internet. So spread it around so people can have a look at that. Yeah. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Renata. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Renata.